So the CCP has pulled off some of the most damaging scams and atrocities in modern history, not just because it's cunning, but because the West has been eager to do business with Beijing. And from the very beginning, the West was played. Let's go back to 1999, when China was negotiating its entry into the WTO. On November 15th of that year, it was the final day of negotiations. There were still 7 issues remaining that were unresolved. And according to a Chinese negotiator by the name of Long Yuntu, according to his memoir, then Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji told his team, "We must sign the agreement today. We can't let the Americans walk away. I will talk to them." So Zhu was acting on orders from Jiang Zemin, then CCP leader, to make major concessions, and he did. As a result, the agreement was signed. But behind closed doors, after the agreement was signed, back at the State Council, when the Chinese were assessing the impact of the agreement on Chinese economy and particularly Chinese agriculture, people were concerned that there will be severe impact or consequences. And then Zhu Rongji gave a now infamous speech to his State Council, and he said, "We agree to these conditions just to enter the WTO. After we get in, whether we follow them or not, that's up to us. Every rule has loopholes that we can exploit." That one sentence says everything. China never intended to play fair. Not then, not ever. So after joining the WTO in 2001, the CCP, a regime hostile to both democracy and free markets, was welcomed into the heart of the global economy. The U.S. and other Western nations opened their trade, investment, academic, cultural, and even media sectors to China. This gave the CCP everything it needed to make money while building a global network of influence. But the Chinese economy isn't a real market economy. It's a war economy. It's a machine designed for unrestricted warfare. The CCP controls everything: land, resources, factories, supply chains, wages, unions, markets, export prices, currency, capital flow, you name it, everything. Whether under Mao's planned economy or today's so-called market socialism, the economy has always been tightly controlled to serve political goals. So in this system, the CCP uses 3 unlimited resources. They are natural, human, and fiscal resources to wage economic war. It produces cheap products and dumps them abroad, using tax breaks, export rebates, low-interest loans, and direct subsidies to undercut foreign competitors. And this comes at a cost, right? No government or economies could sustain that. But in China, it's paid by the Chinese people. Wages are low, work pressure is extreme, housing and healthcare are unaffordable, and education is a crushing burden. Meanwhile, the environment is wrecked. The country has some of the worst air, water. I don't think some of the worst. I think it has the worst air, water, and soil pollution on Earth. So to the CCP, Chinese citizens and natural resources are nothing more than disposable fuel in their war machine. And during the globalization boom, American industries like steel, aluminum, rare earth, electronics, machinery, solar panels, energy storage, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices all moved to China. This gutted U.S. manufacturing and therefore putting on national security at risk. How could the CCP succeed in this strategy? Partly because the United States and the West misunderstood the post-Cold War world geopolitical landscape. But most importantly, it failed to grasp the true nature of the CCP. And so this brings us back to the very core issue, that is, China's WTO membership was one of the most successful part of China's unrestricted warfare. On June 17, 2025, Chinese-Australian legal scholar Professor Yuan Hongbin revealed something stunning in an interview with the Epoch Times. He said that the CCP princeling, Kong Dan, recently criticized Xi Jinping for making 2 major mistakes. But in Mr. Kong's speech, he inadvertently exposed a truth. That is, he gave a number. He said from Deng Xiaoping's era to Hu Jintao's CCP elites, aka the 2nd and 3rd generations of the party elders, the red nobility, they transferred around 20 trillion renminbi overseas, and that's roughly 3 trillion US dollars. These assets weren't just personal fortunes, they were red capital controlled by these people. And they are funds strategically planted in the West to create a foundation for the CCP's influence and infiltration campaigns. If you want to measure or if you want to quantize how deeply the CCP has embedded itself in the Western financial system, that 3 trillion US dollar is a good start. But this red capital network didn't just appear overnight. It was built as a direct consequence of China's WTO entry. It wouldn't happen if the CCP didn't earn US dollars through unfair trade. So this was slowly built up after China entered the WTO. That's what the Red Trojan Horse enabled: deep penetration into the economic, political, and media systems of the West, using Western money, institutions, and values as weapons against themselves. If the CCP didn't exist, the world would mostly face two types of war: hot war and cold war, right? Both are brutal, but they come with rules, lines you don't cross, agreements like the Geneva and the Vienna Conventions. They exist to protect civilians and prisoners of war and diplomats. But the CCP didn't or doesn't follow any of that. Its entire strategy is based on something else. It's based on its unrestricted warfare, where everything is a weapon. Business, technology, culture, even human decency can be weaponized. So unlike the US or the Soviets, China never admits what it's doing, never compromises, and never plays fair. And that's why we now live in a world where the third kind of war has taken root, the type of war with no rules at all. And that is the CCP's unrestricted warfare. And now let's look at American fentanyl crisis. When the Trump administration tried to hold Beijing accountable using the tariffs, the CCP refused to admit any role. They would rather accept a 20% tariff than acknowledge their hand in the overdose epidemic. So trying to fight the CCP is like trying to punch a shadow. It's a one-sided, invisible war. One-sided because you can't retaliate using their tactics. Invisible because they don't follow any rules, while we still try to figure out what their rules are when there are none. And then we still try to follow our rules. So if, let's say, the US bans certain fentanyl-related chemicals, and the Chinese sellers will respond by tweaking the formula, they will add masking molecules to avoid regulatory supervision or inspection. And once the US bans the new version, they will switch to another molecule. It's going to be a chemical shell game with lives at stake. And as long as the CCP's goal is to poison American youth, there's no traditional law enforcement solution. Well, actually, the FBI director, Kash Patel, he told Joe Rogan on June 6 in a podcast that the CCP sees America as its number one enemy, and that flooding the US with fentanyl is part of a long-term plan to destabilize the country. The victims, young Americans, future cops, teachers, and soldiers, dying in the tens of thousands every year. I think it was last year, there were 48,000 deaths related to fentanyl. So this isn't a drug cartel chasing profits. It's a rogue regime committing chemical warfare, one that's deliberately targeting Americans' people. And when China agrees to negotiate, it's just part of the game. Their goal is to trap you in endless diplomatic loops while continuing their operations behind the scenes. Dialogue becomes a smokescreen for more drugs, more cyber attacks, more subversion. History shows that any negotiation with the CCP doesn't solve anything. Is there any negotiation with the CCP that has been successful? There isn't any. And after the Cold War, the West somehow believed communism had collapsed and that China had embraced capitalism. That illusion led to one of the biggest strategic miscalculations in modern history. And the truth is, the CCP functions like a machine built for total war. Its political system, economy, media, education, everything, diplomatic apparatus, all of it is designed to achieve one thing: victory over its enemies. And in pursuit of that goal, it will use any weapon, cross any line and sacrifice anyone. Now, I think the world is beginning to understand what that means, but I think we need to hurry up.